Sorry, I got cut off at the end of the last screencast, but I was basically going on about the coordination challenges and how difficult it is to coordinate when you have all these logistical challenges of a conflict situation and different government and other institutional or organizational services that might have been integrated beforehand or maybe ideally should be integrated. It's impossible for them to work together during a conflict situation often because of resource challenges, because of logistic challenges, because of the death or the disappearance of people who have worked in those functions before. Right, so it becomes a big challenge. There's a failure to develop successful initiatives to build the skills of young people and prevent their recruitment in some sort of conflict or war activity. And so the challenge really here is that young people are brought into the education system often against their will or often because of situations that they cannot control. These are some of the child soldier issues that you guys are investigating for your class project. So, we come up with a couple of questions here. One is, should education be offered or continued during and after conflicts and disasters? That's a big question. Should it be offered at all, or is it only a way to further inculcate certain ideologies or biases in youth? So, if no, why not? If yes, well, what might be the reasons why education should continue to be offered during and after conflicts and disasters? Well, we have some ideas from UNESCO. UNESCO, in fact, has 9 reasons that they recommend providing education during and after conflicts and disasters. And by the way, they're linking those two together. Let me just read through this quickly and then I'll comment. In 2000 at Dakar, the global community committed itself to achieving education for all, including those affected by conflict and disaster. We, the governments, organizations, agencies, associations, and groups represented at the World Education Forum, pledge ourselves to meet the needs of education systems affected by conflict, natural calamities, and instability. UNESCO's education sector has a vital role to play in supporting the Dakar signatories to keep this commitment. All right? So, one is that the country, most of the countries, or almost all the countries that are a part of the UNESCO organization's framework, have agreed to provide education for all. So one reason to provide education in any situation is because a promise has been made. Because communities and countries, and the global community in particular, has agreed that everyone should be able to achieve education in any situation. And so even when there is a conflict or a natural disaster, education still has a vital role to play, they would argue. Number 2, quality education is a fundamental human right as laid down by international law. These laws do not distinguish between conflict or disaster-affected populations and those not affected. Additionally, international humanitarian law stipulates that education must be provided to populations affected by war and refugees. Okay, that is really interesting. So, not only is quality education considered to be a human right, and those rights do not go away during and after conflicts or disasters, but also it's international law. Education must be provided to populations affected by war, that's the 4th Geneva Convention, and education must be provided to populations that are refugees, that's the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees. So, international organizations like UNESCO or multilateral organizations like UNESCO and others are going to be involved in providing education in conflict and in post-conflict situations, not only because it has been declared, education has been declared to be a fundamental human right and rights don't go away just because of conflict, but because there's international law stipulating that education must be provided to populations affected by war and refugees. Number 3, education is a fundamental tool for protection of conflict and disaster-affected children and youth from harm and exploitation. That is a big statement. a fundamental tool for protection of conflict and disaster-affected children and youth from harm and exploitation. So education itself is a safe place, a protective tool for children and youth. This is a crucial part of UNESCO's advocacy message. Under appropriate conditions of security, provision of education can help protect children and youth from recruitment into fighting forces, forced labor, prostitution, criminal activities, and drug abuse. In post-conflict settings, education contributes to the reintegration into society of former soldiers and other children and youth associated with fighting forces. So, not only can education help prevent youth from being recruited into fighting forces, forced labor, prostitution, criminal activities, and drug abuse, but also in post-conflict situations, it can help reintegrate into society former soldiers and other children that have been associated with the fighting forces. So child soldiers need education, according to UNESCO, in order to come out of that lifestyle and be reintegrated into society, as well as a way to prevent them from going into that sort of a situation in the first place. Number 4, UNESCO says that by giving hope for the future and providing order, structure, and a sense of normalcy, education can help to mitigate the psychosocial effects of conflict, disaster, and displacement. So in other words, it provides order, structure, and normalcy, and that is a way to mitigate all the bad effects of conflict and other things. Structured play activities and schooling have been shown to ease the shock and trauma of children and youth who have witnessed or participated in horrific acts of violence or who have lived through the destruction of natural disasters and the loss of loved ones and homes. Structured play activities and schooling ease the shock and trauma. All right? So in other words, education can be a cathartic tool. And specifically the structure of education, when it's related to play or whether it's related to academic pursuits like schooling, it can ease the shock and trauma of children. That is an enormous statement. Right? More so, the implication is than other organizations or institutions that might have some sort of interaction with youth. Number 5, conflict and disaster-affected communities place strong emphasis on education, often even giving it priority over more material needs. In other words, they would say in many conflict situations or post-conflict situations, families would say instead of stable homes, it's more important that our children have an education. Affected communities request and expect provision of education for their children. The affected communities are requesting and expecting education for their children from UNESCO. They were expecting and requesting it more than they were expecting and requesting, quite frankly, the basic elements of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which happen to be shelter, food, the basic resources to survive. Number 6, schooling and non-formal education programs enable the communication of essential life-saving messages. Such messages may include landmine awareness, education for human rights, peace and conflict resolution, prevention of sexual and gender-based violence, basic health and hygiene, HIV and AIDS awareness and prevention, education for natural disaster risk reduction, and education for sustainable development. Children and young people can, in turn, be important channels for transmitting those same messages to their families and to the wider community. Right? So the kinds of information that's available in school in conflict and post-conflict situations is not all academic. In fact, none of this is academic here. Right? All of this is non-academic, but it's related to safety, it's related to human rights, it's related to health, it's related to the prevention of injury or death or a reproduction of disaster. Right? And so children in these situations become the channels for transmitting those messages to their families and the wider community. Whereas in a non-conflict situation, it may be the family that communicates messages about safety and about health and other things to their children. So it's sort of a little topsy-turvy there. Number 7, provision of education during displacement can help to overcome gender disparities. Paradoxically, in some post-conflict and post-disaster situations, girls may have the opportunity of access to schooling more regularly than they did before the crisis. Because when they are attending schooling post-crisis, a lot of the cultural and structural barriers that might have prevented girls from being part of a schooling system will have been at least temporarily suspended, if not destroyed. That is interesting. The suggestion is that conflict situations can in some ways perhaps even benefit girls and women if they have been disadvantaged in the previous system, because when the conflict occurs there will be enough of a disruption in their social and cultural mores and the structures that upheld them that they might be able to get the same sort of educational opportunities that boys have. That's a significant thing. Number 8, provision of education in post-conflict and post-disaster situations promotes economic and social reintegration and reconstruction. For example, when linked to market needs for reconstruction, skills training can contribute to restoring a sense of normality, facilitating revival and promotion of livelihoods and alleviating poverty. UNESCO has a specific role in making available its expertise in educational planning and management and capacity building to facilitate reintegration and reconstruction. Okay, so it will facilitate economic and social reintegration and reconstruction because it can be linked to market needs and other sorts of training. Although I personally question this one a little bit because I think that there has to be a link that existed beforehand in order for it to be rebooted after the conflict has ended. But maybe that's just me. I think that education can certainly contribute to labor market development or easy transitions or knowledge and skills that are marketable. I certainly think that's possible, and whatever education occurs, it will be part of capacity building. However, I'm going to question this one a little bit because I don't think that the connection between education and economic and social reintegration is that tight. Number 9, the joint efforts of national governments and the international community to respond to conflict and disasters may provide an opportunity to build back education systems to better standards than before the disaster or conflict. Reform of system management, curricula, and learning methods to new standards often becomes possible during recovery and reconstruction, providing an opportunity to increase educational access, retention, quality, and equity. Now, this is only true if the force that is helping, if the governments that are set up or if the international organizations that are helping to rebuild education post-conflict are actually ones that support education, right? So if there is a community that has let's just say won whatever conflict it was, to the victors go the spoils. The ones who win get to write the system and the structure and the history books and all those things. So the idea is that there's a post-conflict situation where UNESCO or other Western organizations are involved, or international organizations that have similar sorts of ideology as UNESCO. This is the implication, that then they can be used to build back education systems to better standards than before the conflict. However, I wonder if that also is true for non-Western or local organizations when they rebuild back as well. Can they do it to a better standard than before, or will they do it at all to the level that it existed before the conflict? All right, so let me ask you, what did you see? Did you see any of the 9 reasons just explained come through in our readings for, I won't just say this week, but our readings towards the end of this semester? I've already pointed out that we have the Bridlid article on Sudanese images of the other education and conflict in Sudan that we read, and certainly this relates there. But I'm interested where else you saw these sorts of things come through. Is conflict and post-conflict education really enough of an issue that we want to, that we will be able to see these sorts of things coming through in other readings that we're doing or other situations around the world? Could you see, for example, some aspects of this that might be played out in a developed country that might have experienced some sort of conflict or natural disaster? For example, post Superstorm Sandy here in the northeast part of the United States, are there any of these 9 reasons for education being involved that you saw playing out there? All right, that is what I have for post and active conflict and education and equity. I'm interested in hearing more from you guys on the discussion board about what you thought of these sorts of ideas about active and post-conflict education and equity, what your ideas about globalization and equity versus equality are, and how we might move forward to think about the child soldiering website project as a result of this conversation. All right, hope you guys are having a great day.